everyone, and welcome to the 10th edition of Finding Our Freedom. Finding Our Freedom is about the positive political and socio-economic change that we need to see in the Caribbean and how to make it happen. We aim to transform how Caribbean people understand the challenges in our region and empower everyone with actionable solutions to drive real change in our communities and our countries. For this episode of Finding Our Freedom, we come to you live from Vanuatu in the South Pacific. Vanuatu has been declared by the United Nations as the world's most vulnerable nation to natural disasters. But instead of passively accepting their fate, the people of Vanuatu have adopted an exemplary leadership role in raising awareness, creating solutions, and holding industries and countries to account for their role in the climate crisis. And to discuss this with us today, I am so excited and honored to have Vanuatu's Minister for Climate Change Adaptation, Energy, Environment, Meteorology, Geohazards, and Disaster Management, the Honorable Minister Ralph Regenvanu. Minister Regenvanu is currently serving his sixth term as the Member of Parliament for Vanuatu's capital and largest city, Port Vila, which is where we are at right now. And as Vanuatu's foreign minister in 2019, Minister Ralph initiated Vanuatu's push for an International Court of Justice advisory opinion on climate obligations. And as climate change minister in 2022, he signed Vanuatu up as one of the first state champions of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Minister Ralph's leadership ensures that Vanuatu continues to be a strong voice in global climate and environmental negotiations, reinforcing the urgent need for ambitious action to protect vulnerable small island states. Minister Ralph is also currently the Pacific Ministerial Champion for Loss and Damage leading into COP30. Honorable Minister Ralph Regenvanu, welcome to Finding Our Freedom.
Thank you for having me, Marla.
So let's get right into the discussion today. And the first thing, of course, as I just mentioned, the ICJ opinion. So I would like to ask you, how did that come about from, it started as a student movement and ended up in this landmark opinion issued by the ICJ. Can you share with us your journey towards that opinion?
Well, as you know, Vanuatu has been part of the Pacific SIDS that are part of the Association of Small Island States, which all the Caribbean states are part of also. And that is a negotiating bloc at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, conference of the parties every year, which we call the COPs. And we have been negotiating valiantly, like for 30 years now,
Wow.
trying to get this increase in greenhouse gas emissions that's causing global heating, which is causing intensifying impacts of extreme weather events on our countries. And I don't need to say that to our Caribbean colleagues. We all know what that means for us in practice.
Absolutely.
So, this framework convention is supposed to address global greenhouse gas emissions, get everyone reducing their emissions. So we're on the pathway to this 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels that was agreed in Paris as part of the landmark Paris Agreement. Also, as part of Paris, we agreed on the high emitting states, the developed countries, providing climate finance of a certain amount to developing countries to help them in their adaptation to the effects of climate change, as well as reducing their own emissions. And colleagues in the Caribbean will know how frustrated we have been in not seeing states meet the obligations that they signed up to themselves. In Paris, it was all countries in the world, except perhaps the US, who all agreed to these actions. And yet here we are.
Voluntarily.
Yes, and here we are, many, many years later, and we haven't seen those commitments to that level required. So the idea was to actually raise the question with the highest authority on international law in the world, which is the International Court of Justice, so that we can have a definitive statement about what state obligations are with respect to climate change, with respect to the commitments we have made, both under Paris, but maybe under other international law instruments. Does climate change become relevant under human rights instruments, for example, considering that our human rights are being fundamentally impinged by climate change? Our right to, a home, a safe home, a shelter, food. These are all things we know are challenged by climate change. And so the idea of getting an advisory opinion from the world's highest court, the highest authority on international law, which is the International Court of Justice, has been around in academia for many, many years. This is something that we should do to get clarity.
Yes.
There was an attempt by some Pacific states about, I would say, maybe 30 years ago to try this, to embark on this route, but they were frustrated right at the outset by larger countries who had special relationships with them, saying, go down this path.
Wow.
What happened in 2018 in Vanuatu was that students at the University of the South Pacific School of Law, which is here in Port Vila, Vanuatu, were given an assignment question by their professor, which was basically, what is the single legal intervention that could be made that would have the maximum impact on addressing climate change? And so in this class, they came up with, obviously, an advisory opinion from the ICJ on the obligations of states and the consequences of not meeting those obligations. The students were so enthused by this idea that they formed a group called the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change, PISFCC. So they had this new organization across all the Pacific Island countries with students representing each country that was a law student in this class. They broadened it to include other law students, other students. And then they began their campaign, which was basically to first approach Pacific Island states and see if the Pacific Island states were willing to begin this process of going to the General Assembly, getting the votes required so that there could be a request to the ICJ for this advisory opinion, because that's pretty much the only route.
You have to go through a state.
You have to go through a General Assembly resolution. You have to get the majority of states to agree that this advisory opinion be requested. And so you have to start with states.
Right.
So they wrote letters to all governments. In 2019, I happened to be Minister of Foreign Affairs for Vanuatu. I received the letter. I'm also an alumni of the law school, so I had an affinity with studying there and so on.
Yes.
And I agreed to meet them. They were in Port Vila, so I agreed to meet them and talk about this proposal. And they came in and they were very convincing. And so as a foreign minister, I decided, well, let's see if we can do this. Let's try again.
Right.
So we took it to the Pacific Island Forum, which is the key regional political bloc of Pacific Island states, and got it through the foreign ministers meeting in July of 2019, and then got it to the Pacific Islands Forum later on that year, and then it started to go from there. The students actually formed international body, World's Youth for Climate Justice, and had youth in all countries of the world lobbying their governments to support this request for an advisory opinion.
Wow.
And after many years and a big diplomatic campaign, and a lot of work in working with international legal experts from around the world, many from the Caribbean, we managed to come up with a text of a question that would be put to the ICJ, for which that we would seek an answer. And that finally got to the floor of the General Assembly in March 2023. And at that time, it was the first time ever in history that a question was referred to the ICJ by consensus. There was no dissenting voices in the whole General Assembly. So that was historic. And it showed the support the young people had managed to build in their own countries for this.
That's just such A beautiful story. I mean, it's given me goosebumps. It must be incredibly fulfilling, and it must be something that you and all of these students, you must be very, very proud of.
Well, it's sort of, it's the archetypal, like the quintessential thing that shows that young people can make change, right? Because this
Indeed.
started right down with young people in a remote island in the Pacific and ended up with a General Assembly vote and then an ICJ advisory opinion.
Phenomenal. And this is something we talk a lot about in the Caribbean. So, in terms of practicality, because of course this is an opinion, an advisory opinion, and the naysayers are quick to point out that it's not binding. But apart from that, which is, I suppose a legal, technical feature of this opinion, what, in your view, has been the impact of this opinion being secured from the ICG?
I think what's important about this opinion is that it removes ambiguity around what is the international law when it comes to state obligations to address climate change. There were many different views taken, and there was a general understanding that this was the case. But obviously, when we were in negotiations, when we are in negotiations with other countries, they perhaps will emphasize different things. They will not necessarily say, well, yeah, there's this, but there's this. So this was the first time we actually, from the ICJ as the world's highest authority on international law, we got basically a crystallization of what the international law is when it comes
Good.
to state obligations on climate change. And because the advisory opinion was so strong, and because it was adopted by consensus of all the 8 judges, reflecting 18 different countries. So there's 18 ICJ judges at the time, all unanimous and saying very strongly that there is obligations under international law, not only the Paris Agreement, not only the UNFCCC, but in fact the whole corpus of international law, ranging all the way back to, in fact, what the UN was set up for, the very UN Charter. There are duties there to address issues of climate change, which are basically pollution of the environment by states by emitting greenhouse gases, which cause the state to the globe to heat, which
Yes.
then affects the it makes it so that large numbers of people can no longer effectively enjoy their human rights, which the UN was set up to safeguard in the first place,
Right.
and the self-determination of states to determine their own futures. How are they going to develop? What are they going to do for their citizens? As we know, in the small island developing states, the agency of states, governments, is severely curtailed by extreme weather events and sea level rise and this kind of thing. You can't actually do what a state made up of a politically self-determined group of people. For example, the people of Vanuatu who became independent in 1980, so we could set our own destiny. In
Yeah.
fact, large parts of our destiny are being determined by other states by their
Yes.
conduct in allowing excessive greenhouse gas emissions, which are causing all these extreme weather events and slow onset effects of climate change as well, which we are now spending a disproportionate amount of our time as a government having to deal with these problems that we didn't create.
Right.
Vanuatu contributes 0.0016% of greenhouse gas emissions. So in fact, we're a carbon sink. So we are
Yes.
doing our part, but it's others not doing their part, which is greatly undermining our ability to have a self-determined future. So just having that set in July last year by the court basically means when we now engage in negotiations, they're still difficult. They're still, we're poles apart on many issues, but international law is clear.
Yes.
We now know what international law is, and we can argue on that basis. And there are certain arguments that have been made by other states in the past, which are no longer tenable and can't be made anymore. So
Mm.
That's important that we just have that line in the sand in terms of what you can talk about when it comes to international law and duties of states to protect their citizens, duties of other states to ensure that political self-determination means something and that the rights of states is respected.
That's powerful. That really, I guess, elevates the whole conversation beyond us debating what certain things mean. Now we know what everything and what everybody's obligations are very clearly based on this opinion. So, are there any next steps or follow up action related to this opinion that you want to share with us that you all are undertaking?
So the next step now is that there's two paths we're working on.
Mm-hmm.
One is to get a resolution at the General Assembly again in New York
Mm-hmm.
to basically recognize that the General Assembly requested an opinion. It's now been given. The General Assembly will accept and welcome that decision back and say, yes, we agree that we have requested this. This is the advisory opinion that's been given. We endorse it. And these are some of the ways we're going to operationalize it within the
Okay.
UN system. And so we started working on that resolution almost immediately after the advisory opinion was handed down. And it is now in negotiation in New York.
Mm-hmm.
We've been through two sets of negotiations already. It's quite difficult. Back in 2023, when we had the request made without objection from the General Assembly, so it was a request made by the consensus of all members, that geopolitical moment has definitely passed.
Yes,
We are
yes.
now in a very different world when it
Very.
comes to geopolitics. Um, and so there is an opposing group of states who don't want to see this advisory opinion even welcomed. They don't want to use those words.
Wow.
And we are trying to see what level of ambition we can keep within the resolution, while, of course, having the majority of states supporting it, or the largest majority we can get.
Right.
So it's been a quite intense negotiation process, but the objective is to have the General Assembly resolution, which adopts the advisory opinion, key elements of it, and then provides a pathway to see it continue to be something which the UN refers to
Yes.
in some sort of operational way into the future. And I think we went in with very high, we set a high benchmark for what we wanted as a
Yes.
negotiating start, as a zero draft. And we were fortunate to be supported by a core group of states who've been working with Vanuatu in drafting the resolution, similar to what we did with the resolution, similar to the question we were asking back in
Right.
2023. We have now put together another group of states, including states from all regions of the world. So they've been working with us and then going into negotiations. We've gone into two sets of negotiations. And we hope that by the end of April 2026, this resolution will have been voted on the floor and it would have got through by a good majority. We don't expect, of course, anything like a unanimous vote anymore with the way the world has been polarized lately.
Yes.
But we're hoping for, a two-thirds support would be good. And one of the key things we want out of it is it's a very low bar now, but a Secretary General's report annually
Okay.
about how the advisory opinion is being operationalized, where there are examples of it being put into practice and being implemented by states, where there are opportunities, so that it's constantly something on the agenda of the Office of the Secretary General of the United Nations, that we can continue to have it there as something that we refer to and can interact with. But it also provides us a step where we can actually do more later if we want to,
Right.
if there's a better geopolitical environment in the future.
Right. Because hopefully it won't always be the way it is now. Right. Hopefully
Yes,
things will change. So it means then that this is now a live sort of agenda item on the Secretary General's
yes,
say work plan. Okay.
that's
Okay.
the
But that
objective. Yeah,
that's powerful, and I guess that would make a big difference. Um, but, we talked about extreme weather events, and an extreme can have different meanings and interpretations. And I just wanted to highlight that in my country, in Trinidad and Tobago, just last week, we recorded the lowest temperature ever. I think it was 15 degrees Celsius at El Tucuch, which is the highest point. And that's colder than it has ever been in Trinidad and Tobago. So it's not even just about heat, is the point I'm trying to make. And it's not even just about more powerful hurricanes. For example, Hurricane Melissa that hit Jamaica late last year was 30% apparently more powerful than it would have been were it not for all of the carbon in the atmosphere. It's also about extreme cold as well as the extreme heat. So we're now seeing more volatility in the and a wider band in terms of the temperatures we experience. Um, and we struggle, of course, in the Caribbean, as do you here in the Pacific, with some of these effects, let alone not just the storms, but things like the sargassum, things like the heat. But can you give us a sense and tell us how Vanuatu is coping with some of these challenges that are being posed by extreme weather events?
So one of the main challenges we're facing right now is excessive rain, right?
Yes,
So,
I've experienced some of that in the last few weeks. A lot of rain.
yeah, so basically since the beginning of this year, it's been raining pretty intensely, pretty like
Frequently.
almost daily or by
Yes.
every 2 days or something, quite a heavy downpour. Seeing lots of areas that were never ever flooded in the past now being flooded. So for the first time in living memory, and in fact in ancestral memory, places that we thought were dry and safe are now subjected to flooding. So
Wow.
people are having to realize that they've invested in building somewhere where it's no longer safe and they shouldn't have built there, but it was in the past safe to build there. It no
Right.
longer is. We're seeing um, people having to be evacuated, landslides, and of course, very much huge effect on our roads, right? You're here, you can see we have terrible roads, potholes everywhere. I mean, the rain has meant, along with other, cyclones and so, it means that we now have to, when we're building roads, and we're doing that now, we're trying to repair roads, we have to spend 30 times more than we spent in the past in terms of budget to build a
Yeah.
really strong, resilient road that's going to resist all of these things we're seeing coming at us.
With
So
proper
that's,
drainage, that's like the biggest thing, right? To make sure that the
yeah,
water
so
can get, yeah.
resilient public infrastructure is a huge cost for the government.
Right.
And it's something that for a country like Vanuatu, we just recently graduated from being a least developed country in LDC into 2020. So
Yes.
now we are on the lower rungs of developing countries. Most of our budget goes to education and health, social services. We do have budget for building, rebuilding infrastructure, but nothing like what we need. And so this is one of our big needs is support through climate finance mechanisms that we agreed on in Paris for us to be able to invest once in good infrastructure that lasts.
Yeah.
We're also seeing in terms of the effects of climate change, sea level rise, which just continues. And
Yeah.
every extreme weather event, we see how much further the sea has risen in terms of how much further it intrudes.
Yeah.
But basically, large areas of land which used to be able to grow food on, and you could extract fresh water from, you can no longer do that. It's become inundated by salt water. It can no longer be
Wow.
used for agriculture or water extraction. And we're also seeing, of course, in terms of sea level rise, a large number of areas around the country that are exposed to prevailing winds, for example. The coastline has just been eroding over decades, and it's just getting worse. Those are some of the most obvious effects, but then, of course, we have the effect on education, schools being closed for large portions of the time because they've been subject to a cyclone, have to be rebuilt. We have kids right now in this country, hundreds of them, going to classroom in tents, makeshift tents, waiting for their school to be fixed. and then large times when a large number of days when they cannot attend school because of extreme events like rainfall or so on, or flooding. And so education of kids, the health system, everything is sort of being affected by effects of climate change.
On one of my earlier editions to this program, I talked with the CEO of CRIF, the climate, the Caribbean's. It's parametric insurance basically, and I'm aware that in the Pacific, you guys also have a solution. I feel like that represents, and especially given what we discussed in terms of the absence of, or the significant disappointment, I should say, in terms of the receipts of promised funds from countries that are the largest polluters, those not being received. I'm guessing parametric insurance is one of the bigger policy options available to the government. Is that, I mean, for us in the Caribbean, it's a really, really significant help. And Hurricane Melissa late last year in Jamaica demonstrated just how powerful it really is, and was the largest payout that CRIF ever made to Jamaica. To what extent is that also supportive for you guys here in Vanuatu?
Yes, we've been able to benefit from about two or three of these funds.
Yeah.
And I remember there was one year where we didn't reach the threshold, and then we had to talk about the definition of a threshold of what is
Right.
an impactful event, right? Because
What will trigger a payout?
yeah, the trigger, and these are discussions we're having because sometimes the damage is more significant with a lower threshold cyclone, for example, that stays around for longer and impacts
Longer.
more of the country. So these are ongoing discussions, but recently we have been pleased with what we've been able to get from these funds. Yeah.
Right. So tell us about, in terms of looking ahead, Vanuatu's net zero plans, and also any other sustainability oriented, resilience oriented initiatives like carbon credits, for example. I'm sure that you have a long list of agenda items for these types of activities.
Just prior to COP30, in fact, at COP30 in Belém, we launched our NDC 3.0, a nationally determined contribution 3.0. And you can find this on the internet. If you look up Vanuatu's NDC 3.0,
Right.
you can see it collates all the actions in the different sectors we want to take in terms of mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage in all the different sectors, and costed also. So it is really a synthesis document of the actions we are taking and want to take to address climate change impacts and to build a resilient future for our country. And also, obviously, it's costed so that we can go to donors, multilateral
Right.
banks, donor partners, to say these are the actions and this is what they cost. It's significantly more than our own budget, so it shows how we need this. And this is not something new. I mean, we know how much climate finance is needed to really address the issues being faced by the most vulnerable countries.
Yes.
Generally, we are on a long-term low emission development strategy. We've published ours. We have a national energy roadmap where we are on track to have 100% of electricity generated from renewable power by the early 2030s. The goal is actually 2030, and we will achieve that for all areas of Vanuatu apart from this main city, which is where the most energy is consumed. And here we'll probably get to about over 80% by 2030, but we need a few more years to get to the 100%. We also have,
This is for electricity.
this is for electricity, yes.
Yes. Okay.
For land and sea transport, we hope that, for example, electrical vehicles, we are already starting the trajectory to use them now. And we hope that by the time we have grids that are 100% renewable, we will have the vehicles that also are able to use the grid rather than use fossil fuels.
Fossil fuels, agreed, yes.
The most difficult sector is shipping. In the Pacific, we depend on shipping.
Yes.
And it's a sector which we're hoping that the International Maritime Organization decisions will help to steer. And Vanuatu is also, of course, present at the IMO, and there's a lobby group there made up of small island developing states, which are lobbying for an international fuel levy, which will encourage the shipping industry to move in the direction of renewable fuels and renewable sea transport. But all of these efforts are happening so that we can have this, we can ensure that we are no longer contributing anything to greenhouse gas emissions. But of course, it does not address the high emitting countries. And so
of course,
we are doing our part, and we are making sure we're doing our part. But to urge the other country to do their part, that's where we need these international mechanisms. That's why I went to the ICJ, so we could get international law to be more comprehensive in setting guidelines. And hopefully, as we redevelop multilateralism, we can begin to see cooperation in this regard.
Yeah,
We're
I
looking
mean,
forward
'cause
to, sorry to interrupt,
sorry, go
Marla,
ahead.
but in terms of
Sorry. You go
multilateralism,
ahead. I lost you for a second. Go ahead.
in terms of improving multilateralism, I wanted to just mention the upcoming conference in Santa Marta, Colombia, which is to provide a pathway for phasing out of fossil fuels. This came out of the COP in Belém, because the COP itself would not deal with this issue of the pathway to phasing out fossil fuels. A group of like-minded countries, about 80 like-minded countries, decided we will start a new pathway. And this is what a meeting at the end of April in Colombia is about. And Vanuatu will be hosting a meeting to prepare the Pacific Islands, small island states, for that meeting, for our positions on this topic. So this is an example of encouraging multilateralism, which is in line with the advisory opinion, which we hope can be grown to encompass the entire international community in time. We are, I suppose, setting the precedent now and setting the direction.
Yeah, and clearly Vanuatu continues to take a leading position in these initiatives. But I just want to go back to your point on, and congratulations on these goals of 100% renewable energy by 2030, at least for electricity purposes. We in the Caribbean, we have similar targets. Various countries have articulated, 100% renewable or net zero by certain dates. For us, the problem is not just about the emissions, but it's also about the fact that for most of us in the Caribbean, we are importing 100% of our fuel needs, which has to be shipped in terms of the gasoline and diesel and so on. And then, of course, with the kind of environment we have in terms of global commodity prices right now, based on what's happening in the Middle East, this then also has an inflationary impact. Is this one of the major concerns for Vanuatu and other Pacific islands, or is this is your dependence? My understanding is your dependence on imported fuel is not as high as ours, and it doesn't necessarily have as significant a balance of payments and foreign exchange challenge that it does for us. But is that something that you also are motivated by here in Vanuatu and in the wider Pacific?
Absolutely. And I think our dependence is the same as the Caribbean. Only Papua New Guinea has local sources of fossil fuels. All the rest of us don't. We import 100% of our fossil fuels, and it is a huge financial burden. And of course, subject to the whims of geopolitics and currency exchange rates and so on. So obviously, this is the other side of moving to renewables, is that we get to save huge amounts of foreign exchange that we otherwise would be spending. And so that is obviously a key contributing factor in terms of our motivation. And especially now with what we're seeing in the world,
Yeah,
we have become politically independent. We need to have energy sovereignty. We need to be independent in terms of providing our energy, which is the main
absolutely.
driver of our economies. We need to be able to control that source, and we can see that clearly. I mean, everyone can see that clearly now. And for us, renewable is really the only pathway. And that includes not only solar, wind, and that kind of thing, but also geothermal. We have great geothermal potential in Vanuatu. We are on the edge of the ring of fire. So we have a number of geothermal licenses right now. So these are things we're looking into as ways we can get this energy sovereignty that we so desperately need to really drive our economies forward in a sustainable way.
Yeah, and geothermal is a really, this is really promising with the amount of volcanic activity that you have here. Um, are there any plans around carbon credits and carbon trading based on the type of energy that you have here, renewable energy that you have here in Vanuatu, or green assets?
We are looking into it. We have a pilot scheme now for credits on renewable energy installed in Vanuatu. We're cautious. We recognize that there are the market is not mature enough, or there's not enough integrity in the market right now that we can see for a small country like Vanuatu to participate. But we are definitely looking at it, and we've got our national carbon market framework in a policy passed, which sets out our policy directions for how we're going to engage in this market. And we have pilot projects both in renewable energy installation, but also in nature credits.
Nature credits. Okay, that's interesting. I'll look into that. Well, I think that brings me to the end of my questions for you, Minister Regenvanu. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for spending the time and being available to share all of this information. I also want to again congratulate you and the hard work that you and the people of Vanuatu and all of these students and everybody who has been involved in bringing this landmark question to the ICJ. You've really taken a huge step for humanity forward. I appreciate that, and I congratulate your efforts, and I thank you sincerely for being part of this discussion here today. Thank you very, very, very much.
Thank you so much, Marla. It's a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing the solidarity among our regions grow as we work towards our common goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm working hard on that too. So, more to come. Thank you so much, Minister. Take care. Have a good afternoon. Bye bye.